authority, which was also the civic authority, had them arrested. Now, Ananias asked his guards to go and fetch the apostles the next day. But a miracle happened during the night, and they all got out. It doesn't say how, it just says they all got out. And about the time the guard came back to the religious authority and said, they're not in their jail cells, someone else came rushing in saying, they're over in the temple teaching and preaching. Once again, then you have the passage now. When they brought them, they had them stand before council. The high priest questioned them, saying, we gave you strict orders not to teach in his name. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you are determined to bring this man's blood on us. But Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than human authority. The God of our ancestors raised up Jesus, whom you had killed by hanging him on a tree. God exalted him at his right hand as a leader and Savior, that he might give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are witnesses to these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. So, disciples who were once afraid are now preaching and teaching boldly out in the public. They've been arrested. They've been told, don't do this anymore. They get out of jail. They go do it again immediately. They're brought back before the council. The council says, we forbid you to do this. Why did you disobey us? And their response is, we don't recognize your authority as much as we do God's authority in our lives. We have to do this, no matter what you do or say. The religious authority, the civil authority, you see, they thought when they had crucified Jesus, they had gotten rid of the problem. But the force and the power of Jesus and his message was much more powerful than anything any human being could shut down. You can't do it. You cannot do it. And now the religious authority is starting to realize maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we made a mistake. And then what is perplexing in all of this is when they say to the disciples, are you trying to put his blood on us? Were you trying to make us responsible for his death? When just not long before that, if you remember, as we were going through Good Friday, the same religious leaders, the same religious council, the same civic leaders were going to Pilate and saying, we crucify him. And Pilate says, I find no offense in this man. I have no case against him. Here, we've beaten him. Let that be enough. No, you need to crucify. So they were happy to take responsibility for it when it seemed to be working their way. And now they're trying to backtrack like all great politicians, right? It wasn't our fault. What is the power that inspired these men who were once so afraid to defy the group of people who could have them killed? What is that power and that strength that they discovered to give them the strength to stand up to the authorities who are trying to shut them down? In 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was the largest city in Alabama at the time, and it was also known as one of the most segregated, racist, and violent cities of the time. Martin Luther King was put in prison. Why? Because people didn't want his message getting out. So that's when he wrote his famous Letters from Jail, which he justified the cause. So they said it's time to launch Project C, which is confrontation. And so people of Birmingham started to their nonviolent protest, and they recruited children to be involved in it. The first day, 700 people show up, and they're all arrested. The second day, even more show up. And that's when the civic authorities of Birmingham decide to call in the fire department and hose them down with the fire hoses and sick the dogs on them, and they were mostly all children. By the end of the week, 2,500 people filled the Birmingham jails, and 2,000 of them were children. The pictures got on the news. Everybody heard what happened there. And no matter where you fell on the issue, you could see that a great injustice took place. Did the religious and the civil authority in Birmingham, Alabama, shut them up? What is the strength and the power that goes behind men, women, and children to stand up to those people who could literally kill them? Where do they find that power? Not so long ago, there was a young man, a minister, a Christian minister in Iran named Yosef, and he was arrested for proselytizing Muslims, and the sentence was death. But an advocacy group, a justice group, got involved in his case, and they stood and they fought for him. They gave him a voice. And so the authorities decided that they would make it a misdemeanor to just sharing Christian materials to Muslim people, and time served. And eventually he was acquitted. But what is this power that a human being has where they have the strength to stand up to those who can kill them, imprison them for what they believe in? There was a young girl in Palestine, Pakistan, who thought it was important for girls to be able to go to school. You remember that story? And she proclaimed it. And you know what? Her country fell in love with her. But the religious authority in the region where she lived, the Taliban, the girls cannot go to school. And they shot her in the head. And she lived. Did they shut her up? No. People all around the world now know her. She's recovering. She's walking again. Her family's living safely in London. Well, we hope so anyway. What is that power, that strength that inspires people to stand up to those forces around them that could destroy them? And that power and that strength is the same power that inspired Jesus to go to the cross to fulfill what he had to do to help humanity all over the world and from generation to generation to continue to evolve spiritually. That same power is what filled Peter and the apostles to give them the strength to stand before the religious authority and defy them. It's that same power and that same spirit that filled Martin Luther King Jr. and all those people who literally, some gave their lives for civil rights in the United States. It's that same power and authority that inspired Yusuf to be able to share his Christian faith in a country that would kill him if he did so. It's that same power and authority that helps that young girl to stand up and say, women and girls need to have rights in our country. It's the same spirit. It's that same spirit. And what is that spirit? It's the spirit of resurrection, you see. Religious and civic authorities tried to shut Jesus up. And what's the best way to shut him up? Kill him. But did it work? No. Why? Because of resurrection. See, there's a power and a force in this world and in our hearts and in our souls and our minds that's greater than any civil or religious authority. And whenever the powers that be in this world, the principalities, try to shut it down, they are powerless because they are lesser gods. They are lesser powers. And the power of God's Spirit will inspire us to do things we didn't think we would ever be able to do. But here's the thing. Those are wonderful stories, and those are big stories, right? And I would imagine if I were sitting where you are today, this is something that I might be thinking. I would hope that if I were in those situations that I would do as those people did. I would hope that I would have enough strength and wherewithal to stand up and to do what was right and what was just. But it goes beyond that, you see. Sometimes we can focus on the big events and somehow think that we are somehow separated and not engaged. But the reality is that most everybody here, I'm going to assume, is facing or has faced some great power in their life that tried to shut them down. And what is that spirit? What is that strength that causes us to stand up and do what we need to do when the odds seem so terribly against us? It's the same God that created resurrection, that same God that provides spirit, that same God that empowers. And how does it work? Well, one of the best ways I have found in life and in my preaching is that whenever I want to try to make a grand theological point, share a good story. Tyler Perry, are you all familiar who he is? You know, the Mandia, I think, movies, is that, you know? His last one, was it? Medea? His last one, where he was a shoot-'em-up guy, I don't think it translated very well, but the Medea, very, very popular. He's plays, movies, he's really a fascinating character. And so he shared this story with some friends of his I'm going to share with you now. He was saying that he experienced a really bad rainstorm. Rain was coming down sideways and hell was coming down, and he was reminded that when he was a little boy, he lived in an old house. And in this old house, sometimes when you would have a thunderstorm, it would cause the circuit breaker to overload and shut all the lights out. So on a particular day, he had one of these storms, and he looked across the street, and their lights were on and his lights were off. So he knew what he had to do. He had to go to the fuse box. I've lived in an old house before. You ever remember a fuse box? The little fuse kind of looked like a shotgun shell, right? We'd just go to the hardware store and buy a box of them because every time you had a thunderstorm, you'd have to pull an old one out and stick a new one in. Well, here's the kicker, though. The fuse box was way up in the attic of the house. So for him to get to the fuse box, this is what he had to do. First, he had to get a ladder and climb up into the attic. And then once he was in the attic, he had to go up another group of stairs. And they had all the mechanical, the air conditioning unit, and everything was in the attic. So he had to crawl over all of that. And then at the same time, walking on the rafters so that he's not stepping on the drywall ceiling, because if you do that, what happens? You fall through. And remind you, it is all dark. So this is what he had to do to finally get to the fuse box, to put the new fuse in, and for the lights to come on. And then what he does with that story next, I think, is so special and so powerful. He relates it to the human experience, that so many of us in life have experienced something that caused our circuit breaker to shut down. We've lost the fuse. You know, we still have, the lights are on, we're breathing, we're eating. We're going to work. We're even maintaining relationships, but we're shining very dully. There's not a whole lot of bright light going on. And so here's some things that he shared from this I want to share with you now. So why am I saying this to you? Well, I know that God designed all of us to live the fullest life that we can, to live in the light, love, and joy. It is my hope and prayer today that you will start to do the work to turn on some of the breakers that may have been turned off in your life by difficult moments. What do I mean by that? If you have a dream and you stopped dreaming because it got too hard, that's a breaker that went off. Turn it back on. If you decided that you wouldn't love anyone else because you've been hurt, that's a breaker that's been turned off. Turn it back on. If you have decided to give up on life because nothing seems to go right, Like the service today? That's a breaker that went off. Do we give up? No. What do? Turn it back on. If you have given up on your kids because they won't do the right thing, that's a breaker that went off. So what do you need to do? Turn it back on. And he concludes by saying, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Light up your soul. So, what is it that empowers us to do the impossible? It's the power of resurrection. What is the power behind resurrection? God's Spirit. Everybody here has had your breaker off at one time or another. It still may be there. Have you given up? If you have, stop. It's worth climbing up the ladder, going over the AC system, going over all the rafters, getting to the breaker box and putting it in. It takes work to turn the lights back on. God's power is there for you. All the power that you need to face anything that you face in life. It's all here. The power of the universe is right here. But if your breaker is broken and you don't have the wherewithal to get it fixed and to get the energy flowing again, then God is powerless with you. Is that amazing? You have that much power that if you choose to give up and shut the power of life out of yourself, then you will stay that way. But we don't do that. Why is that? Because resurrection is that important, you see. The message of Jesus was worth the apostles risking their life for. The message of hope and resurrection, that in God's kingdom, everybody's invited to the table. Everybody. With Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, it was worth risking their life for. That civil rights and justice for all were something that you were willing to go out and be imprisoned and risk your life for. To proclaim Jesus in Iran and a Muslim country is worth the risk, because resurrection says, I must share something that's very, very good. I want people to know this wonderful experience and this wonderful experience of knowing the resurrected God. Why do you parents continue to fight for your kids and be a voice for those who have no voice? Why? Why do you do that? Because the end result is worth it. They're precious, beautiful souls, and they need a voice, you see. We don't give up. Even though it's hard, we don't give up. Whatever it is in your life, allow the power of resurrection to take hold of you and to turn it back on so that you're living full and bright and everyone can see the glory of God in you. Do I need to say any more about that, or have I gotten it across? All right, okay, let me try another thing then. Do you hear what I'm saying? Yes. That was affirmative from this side. All right, do you hear what I'm saying? Yes. Resurrection is very real. I want you all to experience it. But you have to be willing to do the work to experience it fully. The power that inspires the great and everybody else in between is the same power that resurrected Jesus, and the same power that resurrects me, and the same power that resurrects you. So let us now prepare our mind and our heart to receive communion. And I think it's a very powerful symbol that as you come this morning to take the elements of the bread and the juice, that's kind of like you're walking to the circuit breaker. I want you to be thinking what it is in your life that's not quite working, that's not quite full on. And as you take the bread and you dip it in the cup and you eat, I want you to see that I am committing myself, God, to turning the lights back on completely and fully. Because resurrection is worth whatever it takes to experience it and to live life fully. I want to ask Steve Case to please come and help me out. At our church, we have open communion. That means anybody who wants to come is welcome to the table. Everyone. We do it by intention. You take the bread, you dip the bread into the cup, and then you eat. Our ushers will guide